Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Patrick Leung. He is the CTO of Faro Health. We are going to discuss his path into health tech, which is pretty unique, how his work on Google Duplex has really shaped his view of AI within healthcare, how Faro is making clinical trials faster, more affordable, trusted by researchers, doctors, and most importantly, regulators. Originally from New Zealand, find yourself now working in kind of tech startup land in obviously Silicon Valley. But I'm really keen to kind of get a bit summary of your kind of background and what drew you to health tech and specifically Faro.
Yeah, well, I guess after my last venture, I was sort of looking for something new. And I was kind of just looking around. I was recognizing that there was this whole AI revolution that was beginning back in 2023. And so I looked at a bunch of different spaces, and it turned out that health tech, life sciences was the area that really all the roads were pointing to as far as opportunities to really apply large language models and other forms of AI in order to create real impact. So that was one factor. It was just looking around and just seeing like this was a huge opportunity. Moreover, as it happens, my dad is a heart surgeon. And I think,
Okay.
when I was growing up, it was almost a foregone conclusion that I would follow in his footsteps and become a doctor of some kind. But I ended up not doing that. I studied computer
Okay.
science and finance and ended up on this whole tech journey. But in some ways, this was a way of reconnecting with him and kind of participating in my own way in his field. And he was super excited when I sort of told him that I was thinking about moving into this field. So there's an element of that too.
Interesting. So I find it really fascinating. People have worked in big tech, so obviously Google being one of the biggest tech firms out there. How did you find that transition, obviously working on projects such as Google Duplex and, working in such a large organization to then joining your current company where it's obviously an early stage startup? How did you find that transition? How did you manage that?
Well, early stage startups are my natural habitat. Yeah, and at some point earlier on in my career, I sort of said to myself that I probably will never work for a big company. And
Interesting.
it took some convincing, but I met this amazing guy who was a very early employee at Google, and he kind of inspired me to apply. And that was a good 11 years that I was there doing all sorts of things, Google Maps, payments, and of course, Google Duplex. Really, my heart is with startups. Like I love the whole 0 to 1, getting things started, thinking about how to apply new technologies, trying things out, and then kind of formulating a product strategy based on that. So I could see that Faro was at this amazing kind of juncture where they already had this SaaS platform for essentially designing and implementing clinical trials. And so they brought me in to figure out what the AI strategy would be. And that was such a really an incredible opportunity to go into a company that already had some success, that already has some really large name pharmaceutical customers, and figuring out, well, how do we power this platform up? How do we do things that weren't done before using large language models? So it's really kind of really a dream to be able to do that, to have that kind of latitude and that kind of potential impact as well
Mm.
in terms of, bringing life-saving medications to people sooner and potentially saving or extending lives, this kind of thing. It's a really great mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it says a lot when people are drawn to the mission over the kind of name initially, because as you right say, Faro, there wasn't really it's not obviously a Google of the world, but obviously the mission and what they're trying to solve or the problem they're trying to solve is hugely valuable. And for the people who are listening here, could you kind of summarize in layman's terms who they are and kind of the problem it's solving?
Sure. I mean, the problem is that for a number of different reasons, bringing a drug to market, like going through clinical trials and basically getting the drug to be certified by regulatory authorities, is a huge endeavor. It's like oftentimes over 10 years
Mm,
and $1 to $2 billion of expenditure to bring a drug to market. And
wow.
this has gotten sort of worse over the years. Like it wasn't always like this. But over the last 50 years, it's kind of gone through this exponential increase in complexity and cost for a number of different reasons. Like if you think about, say, the opioid crisis,
Mm,
or there've been a succession of kind of big public health sort of problems or disasters, arising from essentially medications being approved that weren't safe in some way. And so that has resulted in more conservative stance by the regulatory authorities. And there's a number of other kind of drivers for this that have resulted in this huge cost. So Faro basically has built a platform that essentially replaces Microsoft Word. Believe it or not, Microsoft Word advanced though it is, has been the tool of choice for designing these incredibly complex clinical trials. And so Scott Chatham, the founder of Faro, had this insight that based on his own experiences developing these clinical trials, that we should have a much more advanced tool that gives you insights and metrics and kind of like suggestions and other ways to design better clinical trials in a way that they can be done in less time at lower patient burden and so on and so forth, so with better outcomes. And that was the genesis of Faro Health, is essentially addressing that problem and attempting to bend that cost and time curve downwards through the use of basically an advanced SaaS platform.
Mm,
And so what I've done since joining is kind of build on that and say, okay, well, there's several really great opportunities we have to apply large language models like GPT and Anthropic Claude and so on to further build upon this ability to design better clinical trials.
mm,
So for instance, like one obvious example is you have to submit a Microsoft Word document, like a sort of a really detailed protocol document to the authorities in order to actually get the trial initially approved. And so we use large language models to generate that protocol document automatically. And one might sort of naively think, well, that's really easy. You just use a prompt and you just describe the drug trial you want to create and basically tell it to go and compile a drug trial. And there's a protocol document. And there's a number of reasons why that just doesn't work at all.
mm,
It's not just the fact that the large language model hallucinates and makes things up, but it's also a case of complexity. Like the more complex the desired output that you want the large language model to generate, the more likely it is to just go off course and make things up and kind of really get things wrong. And so we had to adopt a number of different strategies to make sure that the quality of the output was clinical grade. And that
mm,
was a whole adventure that I talk about at length, in podcasts and at conferences and so on about how we went about doing that. So that's one area of endeavor. Just another one quickly is the ability to analyze a trial and use AI to essentially assess the trial and say, well, is this trial well designed? Are there activities that we could potentially eliminate or
mm,
reduce in order to kind of reduce the patient burden and increase your chances of actually succeeding with the trial to enroll patients and to see it through. And so that's something that hasn't really been done before and requires a lot of clinical expertise in the agents that you're building and the prompts you're using to have the AI essentially behave like a clinical scientist and assess the trial. So anyway, we're doing a bunch of interesting things. It's been a real adventure, and we're really, really super happy with the results so far.
yeah, no, it sounds it. I'm really interested to dig on that trust bit because obviously AI, let's be honest, I think is blown up in terms of its use cases and how quickly it's being adopted. And healthcare is obviously one of those which has seen the benefits of it. And you've touched on some valid points about kind of the clinical trials and trying to shorten that timeline to releasing drugs to market to obviously save patients' lives is obviously the goal here. But there is obviously still that challenge and nervousness around AI. You touched on something again about hallucinations, and AI can't 100% be trusted. So what's been your biggest challenge about kind of building that kind of trust around AI that both, and I said at the top of the intro, kind of regulators, researchers, and doctors are all bought into? Because I'm guessing a lot of it's around the education piece, but talk me through that.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we have the big advantage that our CEO and founder is a clinical scientist. So he
Okay.
knows he can look at the output himself and judge whether it's actually, meets the clinical grade or not. But essentially, we have clinical experts, writers, operational experts, and scientists like in our team to ensure that the output of the large language model system we've built is of sufficient quality. And we've invested a lot of time both in kind of a manual review process as well as with this automatic evaluation process that we've built that uses another large language model to assess the results that the first one came up with. And so we have this whole, review system where it asks a bunch of questions. Did you include that? Did you include this? Is the tone a certain way? Is it consistent with the other rest of the document and so on to assess the quality of the generated output? And if the quality is not of a sufficient level, then we go back and we kind of like fine tune the actual prompt in order to try to generate better output. So we have this feedback loop. We have both automated and manual systems to evaluate the content, but it's a lot of work. Like I think
Yeah.
in some ways the generation is sort of the easier part, where we can take advantage of existing trials and templates and guidances and so on to take a first cut, but then taking that first cut and getting to the level of this would pass muster with regulatory authorities is really the hard part.
Yeah, I think it's Such a valid point, isn't it? Because obviously in such a highly regulated sector, rightly so, obviously you're also delivering a service that's trying to accelerate, drugs being released into the market. So when you came in early, your first few kind of months, what were some of your main challenges, kind of personally, that you had to get your head around? Because obviously you'd come from Google, you've obviously worked in smaller companies as well, but what were some of the main kind of personal objections you had to overcome?
Well, I think the biggest thing for me really was wrapping my head around what is a clinical trial, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of conceptual background and domain expertise that's required to even sort of understand, like, how does a trial work? Like,
Mm,
what are objectives and endpoints, and what is the schedule of activities, and what are inclusion and exclusion criteria, and all these kind of different aspects of a clinical trial that together form this kind of design that then essentially forms a plan that goes on potentially for many, many years and involves potentially thousands of people around the world and basically defines like how many times are they going to go into this facility and what procedures are they going to have applied to them and what are the accumulated burden, blood draw, complexity and so on of these procedures. And there's just a lot to it. There's a lot to learn
mm.
for someone like me who'd never really been in this field before. And so that I think was the biggest challenge, is figuring out, okay, given all of this domain expertise and starting to wrap my head around it, like what could we do as far as automation and writing documents and analyzing the protocol and so on.
Yeah, and it's a silly question, but can you confidently say, in light of obviously large language models and obviously AI becoming more mainstream, that's how as far as obviously been set up? Without that, do you think you'd be as successful, or is it just be impossible to get those kind of numbers and output without AI?
I mean, I think that even before AI came along and before I joined the company and so on, Faro was providing some really valuable insights as far
Mm,
as just looking at the entire structured representation of the trial and
yeah.
giving insights into, it seems like the blood draw is pretty high. Like you're performing all these procedures on the patient. It's kind of invasive. Like FYI, like this could be a problem. Like
Mm,
patients may not go for this. They may drop out or not even sign up in the first place, which is one of the main reasons why trials get extended and take longer than people think, is because they have trouble recruiting for the trials because they're too complex. And so I think there was still value in terms of retrospective traditional analytics, like just
mm,
adding numbers up and giving some insight as far as what they mean. But what the AI gives you is this other layer of analyzing the whole trial and looking at it from the perspective of an actual clinical expert. And so you can sort of get the AI to, with appropriate guidance and prompting and evaluation, to start acting like a clinical scientist, which is hugely valuable because, for instance, when you go about designing a trial, there's this huge process of like, what what existing trials are there out there to inform what I'm about to do? What is the precedent? What new research papers are there out there that will help to design this trial in a good way? And that takes some amount of time, to be able
mm.
to identify those documents, download them, read them, extract the knowledge. LLMs can do this, 1,000 times faster than a human. Again, with the appropriate prompting. LLMs are superlatively good at summarizing and extracting the key points and so on. And so this saves real time, really valuable time. These
Yeah.
clinical scientists, these are valuable people. And so the extent to which we can amplify their productivity and help them to really design trials that are fully informed by all the existing knowledge that's preceded the trial is hugely, hugely valuable.
Yeah. And I think you touched on something which was a nice segue actually. You obviously been called a design partner for researchers. What does that mean in practice? Because I get the kind of acceleration of, the speed to market, and I'm getting the automation and obviously how large language models are helping researchers. But from a design partner standpoint, what does that mean in practice?
I mean, I think what it means is that, first of all, we need to demonstrate value. And
Mm,
so one of the big things we did last year was publish a paper with Merck where we just analyzed, like, what can this tool do with a set of reasonably complicated trials that have already been out there? What would we have suggested, as far as design improvements, and what do we think we can do as far as saving time and money during the course of this trial? And, you can take a look at the paper on our site, but essentially, one of the findings was, for a really complex trial that has thousands of people, like I said before, like upwards of 10 plus years, making suitable design choices at the beginning could have saved over $100 million during the course of the trial. And that's
wow.
sort of like, in some ways, I think we could have done better than that, actually, with all the new stuff that we've been doing this year, and with downstream kind of automation that we're looking at now with our partnership with Veeva, with EDC integration. Like, we could actually beat that number
Wow.
similarly large complex trials. So these are huge numbers. Like, it's kind of mind-boggling, right? Like, saving $100 million. That's just mind-boggling.
Mm.
And so I really do believe that once this technology becomes widespread and everybody's using it, that we can bend that curve. They call it 𝐸RIM's law, like this exponential increase in the cost of drug trials. We can definitely bend that downward through the use of AI.
That's fascinating. That $100 million, I suppose, proof is in the pudding. Then, if that's the numbers you're talking about. Does that also reduce the time to market as well? How closely are you monitoring that kind of? Because if it's a 10-year period, for example, I'm guessing you could be in the middle of those clinical trials now, and not necessarily know how much time you're shaving off those kind of clinical trials. Does that make sense? How are you monitoring
Yeah.
that part?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't yet published any projections simply because it's very multifaceted, right? Like
Yeah.
if you improve the design of a trial such that you only have activities in there that are truly necessary, you get rid of all the fluff that tends to accumulate as you sort of copy and paste trials. Not that I'm accusing anyone of doing that, but there's this tendency to say, yeah, let's do what we did last time, plus let's add more measurements, more
Yeah.
activities. And so with this system, we can say, okay, well, here are the essential activities. So there's a trade-off between gathering more data and the actual complexity and cost and patient experience of this trial. And
Mm.
so what I'm saying is that once you've optimized the trial, for sure you're going to be able to enroll patients more easily. For sure
Yeah.
you're going to reduce dropout and chance of failure because of the reduced complexity of the trial. For sure you're going to be more likely to recruit sites. They're going to be more interested in this trial because it's less burdensome, and so that will logically result in a reduction in the amount of time. Moreover, as I mentioned before, we're looking at all these kind of automations, right, with EDC and many, many other use cases. Once you have this digitized blueprint of a clinical trial in a sort of an AI-powered repository, you have the power to really automate a lot of downstream processes that are currently quite manual. So
Mm.
Viva was presenting us at their annual conference last week, saying, look at this. We can now automate this process of setting up all these kind of like field definitions for these case report forms that are further on down the line during the clinical process. And this is hugely valuable to all of their customers. And so what I'm saying is that, yes, the time saving is going to be significant, but it's going to be quite some amount of effort to forecast and add them all up and figure out what the overall time reduction is. But I'm
Yeah.
very much looking forward to the day when we can have a similar, kind of publish a similar paper that we did with Merck, where we go into this and say, we can reduce your average time to market by this much. Because
Yeah.
the crazy stat is that, every day of delay in a clinical trial translates to about $100,000, maybe more of like lost revenue. And so
Wow.
if you do the math, like in a month, you're losing millions of dollars. In like 6 months, you're losing like tens to $100 million. Like it's just, again, like huge. There's a huge impact in terms of not just in terms of getting the mission, fulfilling the mission of getting life-saving treatments to patients earlier, but also financially to these pharmaceutical companies. Like it's just, saving a single day actually is significant.
Yeah, it's huge numbers. It actually surprised me, the numbers you're talking about in terms of the cost of bringing a drug to market, and the time as well. You kind of, people listening here, you kind of, drugs are so accessible, aren't they? But what very few people realize is actually the time and money and kind of investment to actually get that, specifically in the US as well, where there's such hard regulations, rightly so. How do you think over the next kind of 6-12 months things are going to change for you guys? Because you said earlier you've also been working on some really interesting product developments. You've had a lot of it's been a busy year for you, but what kind of things can people begin to hear and see from you guys over the coming months?
Yeah, I mean things are moving really fast because we are actually using AI internally to
Yeah.
accelerate the process of developing product. And so for sure, now that we have this kind of flywheel of generating clinical documentation up and running, there'll be additional documents that are further downstream. The ICF, the lab report, like many other documents that are on our list to automate over the next, 12 months. I think there'll be an increased focus on analysis, like being able to analyze existing trials and provide insights and automatically apply those to the design so that we can
Mm.
actually very quickly come up with an optimal clinical trial design. And I think there'll be a lot of downstream integrations. Like, as I said before, like if you look at the actual kind of map of all the different systems that are involved during the course of a clinical trial's lifetime, there's like dozens of them. And so there's
Mm.
all these processes that historically, you've had to read that protocol document and kind of manually transcribe. There's some horrible statistic that says that information is replicated manually at least 5 times, the average sort of core piece of information in a clinical trial, simply because there hasn't been this digitized platform to actually store things in and make accessible. And so I think the potential for us to really get in there and automate a whole bunch of downstream processes to do with document generation, but also to do with systems integration and data generation is just huge. And so there'll be a lot more of that, I think, in conjunction with various customers of ours that we can announce over the next 12 months. But it gives you a taste. I mean, there's a whole lot of things going on. Plans change all the time as well based on
Yeah.
a customer demand, but there's just a lot of, I think, excitement amongst our customers about the possibilities here.
Oh, I think it's exciting. I think you're solving a genuine problem, and ultimately in the long term, it's saving people's lives and getting drugs to market more effectively and quickly. And as you rightly say, you've got referenceable case studies and points of saving companies, organizations money, which that coinciding with obviously bringing drugs to market more quickly, more effectively is obviously why you're having the successes you are. I think I really appreciate you coming on. And my final kind of question to you is, over the kind of last year or so, what are you kind of most proud of? What do you think you can sit on, when you're with your family and I think, we did something really good there. What one thing stands out for you?
I mean, I think, there's a lot of really interesting AI related work that we're doing that hasn't really been solved before. And so as a technologist, I can say, yeah, like I'm proud of the fact that we really slogged it through and learned a bunch of lessons the hard way, trying things out that didn't work, and we stuck with it, and now we are really delivering a lot of high quality content for our customers. I'm actually proud of the fact that a couple of our customers actually referred us to other companies. So we
Nice.
had a couple of these coming in through our customers, which to me, from the business perspective as an entrepreneur, that's just like the highest form of compliment.
Yep.
When, it's like the whole net provider score thing, right? Like they actually did it. They recommended us to others, and those people signed on. And it's really beautiful. Like I think
Yeah.
that's all you can really ask for as a business, is that you produce something that's valuable enough that people recommend it to their peers.
100%, 100%. What a great way to finish up. I think, yeah, it's been super insightful, and I'll make sure we tag you guys so people can take a look at the website and some of the case studies, and make sure you follow Patrick and the team, because as I say, you are generally doing some life-saving work there. So thanks so much for coming on. It's been really enjoyable and hugely insightful.
Thanks for having me on the show, Alex. I really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Patrick. Appreciate it.